seja louca, que eu seja puta.
Hello and welcome to our weekly film show. We're starting with the entertainment industry's latest casualty from the coronavirus pandemic, Cineworld. The second largest cinema chain in the world has announced it will be shutting all of its locations in the UK and the US, nearly 700 in total. The move threatens tens of thousands of jobs. Claire Rush has more.
The curtain is coming down on Cineworld, the world's second biggest cinema chain. Amid a series of delays for major Hollywood blockbusters, including most recently the latest James Bond film, Cineworld says it had no choice.
From liquidity point of view, we were bleeding much bigger amounts when we are open than when we are closed, because we'll be like a grocery shop with no food.
The move means Cineworld will shutter its 536 Regal theaters in the US and its 127 Cineworld and Picture House venues in the UK. Some 45,000 employees are affected. The chain hopes to reopen its venues in a couple months' time, but that possibility is far from certain. Its closures add yet another blow to the entertainment industry, one of the hardest hit by the coronavirus pandemic. With social distancing restrictions, movie theaters are struggling to attract customers, a trend further exacerbated by Hollywood studios' pivot to online streaming. Earlier this year, at the height of international lockdowns, DreamWorks released Trolls World Tour in theaters and for digital rental on the same day. More recently, Disney decided against releasing its Mulan remake in U.S. theaters, opting instead to put it directly on its own streaming service, Disney+. With few blockbusters set for release for the rest of the year, many movie theaters now face an uphill battle to fill their seats.
Well, one person we can be sure will continue going to the cinema as long as they're open is our film critic Lisa Nesselson, who joins us from her home here in Paris. Hello, Lisa. Are things as bad in France?
Well, there's a shortage of Hollywood-style movies here as everywhere, although Tenet is at 1.8 million admissions and counting. But in France, the cinemas are owned by French companies. So far as I know, there's no Chinese or Japanese or Saudi investments in France's chains or independent cinemas. Cinemark and Regal are British and American, but a controlling interest in the world's biggest theater chain, AMC, is held by a Chinese conglomerate. French cinemas are not a tiny piece of a much bigger empire beholden to central planners. Of the nation's 6,000 screens, a significant number are run more or less as a public service by local governments to enrich the life of the community. They're programmed just like a commercial cinema, intended to turn a profit or at least not go broke. But the underlying idea, and it's a strong one nationwide, is that moviegoing as a communal experience is important. Be they commercial or nonprofit, almost 40% of the screens in France operate as salles d'art et d'essai, what we call art houses in English. To retain the art house designation and qualify for subsidies, theaters must offer a certain number of discussions with historians or filmmakers or specialists in conjunction with the films they show. Now, in the U.S., cinema chains rely on people buying popcorn and overpriced beverages in order to turn a profit. Concession stands outside the chain theaters in France are incredibly rare. People come from all over the Paris region to the 3 art house cinemas with a total of 7 screens on Rue Champollion in the Latin Quarter. Now, according to their managers, they're all doing almost as well as they did prior to confinement. Their clientele is accustomed to paying to see restored classics and less mainstream new releases. So Hollywood holding back is irrelevant to their bottom line. The market share of heritage films nationwide rises every year. And as for the more conventional theaters, the major chains, Gaumont, Pathé, UGC, and to a lesser extent, mini chain MK2, well, their business is down because it turns out a lot of French people aren't that fond of French movies, which is mostly what's available as new releases.
Okay, well, let's find out about some of the new releases, starting with a French documentary that spurred plenty of debate, Un pays qui se tient sage, which translates as a country that behaves itself, or a docile country. Tell us about David Dufresne's film.
Well, some people collect stamps or vintage record albums. David Dufresne admirably, painstakingly collects instances of police brutality as reported by individuals on the receiving end or witnesses to excessive force. At the start of the Yellow Vest protests across France in late 2018, he created a project dedicated to documenting police violence nationwide as thoroughly and impartially as possible. People sent him videos taken in the heat of the action, and he was able to verify 95% of what's used in the film from 55 sources as rigorously authentic. Now, the structure of the documentary is basic and very effective. He has one or two people in a darkened room where they watch on a large screen footage from cell phones or professional camera crews depicting altercations between protesters and law enforcement and violent or ethically questionable acts. Now, we don't always see what came before, but we do see people being clubbed, a man whose hand has just been blown off, a lot of punching and bloodied faces. The film starts with a man wearing an eye patch, watching video of the moment he lost his eye. We hear a kerboom, and then we see him, we see a man in a yellow vest crawling on his belly, shrieking, absolutely shrieking. The man in question watches the video evidence of what happened to him and says things like, well, my memory is that I was trying to stand up, but I wasn't trying to stand up at all. As the film makes clear, the relationship in France between the people and the police goes back to the French Revolution, when the King's Guards gave way to an experiment we're still wrestling with. Various commentators ask who the police are really working for: private property rights, the state, or le peuple, the common man.
Okay, well, let's take a look at the film and hear the director describe what he intended.
We see them in their whole duration, as a whole sequence, without interruptions from notifications and such like. We're in front of a big screen, we're in the cinema, so we can't escape from what we're seeing. Whereas on social media and on telephones, once you scroll down, it's gone, almost forgotten. The idea of the film is to pay homage to the people who filmed these events.
This film would have been shown in the director's fortnight sidebar in Cannes, had the Cannes Film Festival taken place in May. How do you think film professionals from all over the world would have reacted to the film?
Well, I assume they'd express frustration, as I did, with a deliberate choice the director made to not identify talking heads when they're talking. Dufresne doesn't want anybody's credentials to distract us from or unfairly weight what they say, and so he waits until the very end to tell us who's a housewife or a sociologist or works at the UN or for the police union. That said, everybody is very well spoken. The topic of police brutality is very much in the news, especially in the US right now. In some examples here, police seem to use restraint. In others, police violence is clearly uncalled for. Now, there were relatively few camera crews covering the demonstrations of May 68, and much of the most violent footage was suppressed and unseen until just 2 years ago. What has changed is the advent of the cell phone. These images are raw and immediate. One policeman complains that it's hard to do your job when you're constantly being filmed, and that got a laugh from the audience I saw the film with. The title refers to what a perversely proud policeman is heard to say as the camera surveys rows of high school students being forced to kneel on the ground with their hands clasped behind their necks in a low-income Paris suburb. Now, this is what a well-behaved class looks like.
Okay, moving on to a Portuguese film based on a true story 100 years ago. France is the second country to show it. Star Maria de Medeiros works regularly in French film and theatre. Tell us about L'Ordre Moral.
Well, the director wrote the script for Maria de Medeiros, who plays real-life heiress Maria Adelaide Coelho, who in her late 40s in 1918 ran off with her 22-year-old working-class chauffeur who was had anarchist tendencies, shall we say, to boot. For a woman of status and means in Lisbon a century ago, that's something there aren't enough frowns available to sufficiently frown upon. Our protagonist inherited a leading newspaper from her father. Her husband husband, who of course has a fetching, much younger mistress, but that's okay because he's a guy, sets about having her declared insane so he can get his hands on her money. Much maneuvering and distress ensues.
And Lisa, there's a lot of discussion about a shortage of roles for women of a certain age, but it's a bit different here in France, isn't it?
That's absolutely true. And here in this Portuguese movie, Maria de Medeiros is perfectly cast. She has to navigate harrowing situations and convinces every step of the way. This is the second film by Mario Barroso, who is best known as a cinematographer, so it looks great. We understand that the Spanish flu is ravaging Europe, but that needn't detract from beautifully attired upper-class women gathering to gossip or taking time out to minister to the sick. The film handles the supposed scandal of a substantial age difference with refreshing deference. And this is a relatively rare chance to see Maria de Medeiros act in her native language. You may have seen her as Anais Nin in Philip Kaufman's Henry and June, or as Bruce Willis's French girlfriend in Pulp Fiction, who forgets to pack a family heirloom watch to very entertaining effect. She acts in half a dozen languages on film and on stage. She's currently appearing in Jean Cocteau's Les Enfants Terribles in the south of France. She also sings beautifully and directs. Her presence in a project is almost always an indication of quality, and this film proves it.
Okay, Lisa, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys at home are going to leave you with a taste of Lord Moral. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Credo, Maria Adelaide, que ideia macabra. Não se esqueça do meu presente.
Perdeu completamente a razão. Diz que tenta enlouquecê-la e que a quer roubar.
Falou com o Cid.
E o Júlio de Matos também.
És tu que me vais ensinar a não ser ordinário? Ninguém na minha condição foi tão ordinário como tu foste esta noite.
O que é que têm mais medo? Que eu seja louca? Que eu seja puta? Que eu seja lésbica? Ou que seja tudo isso ao mesmo tempo?
O seu marido, família, eles vão acabar por desistir.
Não nos conheces.